And then I will hand it over to Amy.
All right. Well, I thank you for having me here. Let me just make sure everything is going here. Can you all see my niche triad slide here? Okay, great.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to hear that people are interested in speaking, podcasting, etc. I really kind of believe in this whole niche triad for a wide variety of things. And where I stumbled upon it is when I first got out of the Air Force, and I basically did public relations, but we didn't call it public relations in the Air Force. They call it public affairs. And a lot of the language that I used was so incredibly different than the civilian world and trying to make that mesh. And I kind of stumbled upon this idea that the more I sound like what you're looking for exactly, the more likely it is you're going to pick me, pick me. And so I've kind of expanded that into my speaking work, into my podcast, which has nothing to do with my speaking work. Like Julie said, I've got a pet podcast, but my paid job is as a professional speaker. And the idea of the niche triad came about when I was teaching at the National Speakers Association, the Houston chapter's Speakers Academy, because I felt like speakers were coming in and they would, and I remember one in particular, it's like, well, what do you speak on? I speak on happiness. And my first thought in my head was, ain't nobody gonna pay you to speak on happiness. Okay, so, and that's not really true. I'll get to that. But this concept of the more you can drill down, the better off you're going to be. And you can drill down in multiple different directions, like Connie, you had mentioned, you have different, your book is about compassion, but the idea of yoga and the other things that you do, it's a matter of targeting towards what it is that person that might be hiring or paying or sponsoring a podcast, whatever, what are they looking for you to be in that moment? And, when you go out to speak to them, because we're multifaceted. I think when you get into trouble is when you try to be too many things, like out of your wheelhouse. Like, yeah, I can speak on AI. Yeah, I can speak on DEI. And it's like, you know, probably not as well as somebody else. So that's kind of what the niche triad is about, is how do you drill down? And the concept of the triad is basically if you can get all three, you're going to be in that category of one more than somebody that doesn't do any of it, or somebody that might have one piece of it. So your goal would be to try to identify how can I get into all three and get that focus. So let's kind of get into it. So in speaking, for sure, one of the things that you hear a lot is, you need to find your niche. You need to stay in your lane. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before. What that basically means is when somebody says, who is the expert on this topic in this industry to speak to my audience? For example, I would guess that if somebody who worked for the city of League City, Texas, was speaking to somebody who was speaking to somebody from the city of Brownsville, and they said, who do you know who's an expert on teaching frontline customer service for our water utility billing department? That the odds are they're going to name me as at least one of the top couple people, maybe the first one, because that happens to be one of the niches that I fell into, and I'll explain how I got into that. So it's like you want to be that go-to person, or at least one of the top go-to people, because obviously thinking that you're going to be the only in the entire universe is awesome, but what are the odds? But as close as you can get to that is what we're kind of shooting for. The problem is, and I think people, especially in speaking, and I know I struggled with this even in my podcast. The first year of my podcast, I covered under the umbrella of pets a lot of topics. I had a lady come on the show that talked about dog dancing. I had, rescue people come on. I had doctors come on. I had veterinarians come on, nutritionists, and it did okay. But what I realized is, the more that you can narrow down, the more you stand out in a crowd of, as Julie can attest to, there's a lot of pet podcasts. Who knew? How many there's probably over 100, maybe more than that, maybe 200 in the umbrella of pets and animals. And then there's the fringe ones, that are kind of like veterinary. And so it's, it can be very exponential as to how you're trying to stand out from that crowd. So people who are generalists, they're basically going to say, I can talk about all of these things, or they have a very broad topic that they speak on, like leadership. Well, what aspect of leadership? Leading who? Leading how? What is the focus? And the more you can answer those questions, the better off that you're going to be. So you don't want to be that person that covers every topic or that just has one huge category. And then the other aspect is the more you can target down to, if you are an expert in this, for whom, who is it that is your audience? Now, for those of us who've done podcasting, that's a huge part of developing your podcast, is who is the listener that you're trying to attract to your show. So it's the same thing in speaking. Who is the person that you're trying to attract, either to be in your audience or to write the check for you to speak to their audience, versus I can talk to any industry. And the beauty is you're not going to just talk to that one industry, but you've got to have a place to focus so that people can focus their minds on you when you start off. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. And I think that is a big mistake of emerging speakers, is they don't want to leave anything out. So they try to be this Jack or Jill of all trades. And the bottom line is, generally, people don't want to hear from generalists, and they don't want to pay generalists. What they want to pay is the best. And I'm sure you think about this, you ask around, who's the best mechanic? Who's the best doctor for this? Who's the best podiatrist? Whatever it might be. You don't want the mediocre one. You want the go-to guy or gal. And so, I always ask in this, when I do this session, it's like, okay, if you had a glioblastoma, which is a very bad brain tumor, which is not easy to treat, of the options that I will give you, who would you want to take it out? And, a general surgeon who's done 400 surgeries? Would you want a general surgeon who has removed 400 tumors? Would you want a neurosurgeon who's done 400 brain surgeries? Or would you want a neurosurgeon who has successfully removed 400 glioblastomas, just like the one you've got? Right? You know, I don't think anybody's going to pick anything but D in this instance. You want that best. That's the person that you're looking for. And what I want to make clear is that by narrowing yourself down to, I am the go-to person for glioblastoma surgery, and I do a lot of writing in that area, and I do a lot of speaking on that, it doesn't limit my scopes. It actually broadens my opportunities, because I'm going to be that word of mouth go-to. You've got to listen to this person. You've got to read that paper that person wrote. You've got to go get a consult with that person. And that word of mouth is, that's the free advertising that comes out as a result of that. So no, by narrowing down, you're not limiting your scope. You're concentrating your scope in whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's the speaking or the podcast. And the other thing I like to remind people too is that, just because that person just, focuses a huge percentage of their attention and experience in the area of doing glioblastoma surgery and speaking on it, they do other type of neurosurgeries. I guarantee you that people, it's like, well, if he or she can do that, then they can probably do this simpler thing. So people are going to come to that person anyway. So just because I might put myself out there, when I get my foot in the door with a client for a particular topic, and I have really narrowed the information that I have sent that client about what I can do for the audience based on the goal that they have set, what do you think they do after they like what I presented? What's the first question that comes up afterwards? What do y'all think?
I don't know.
What else can you do? What other things
Ah,
can you think
there
on?
you
I
go.
mean, that's almost always the question. It's like, how else can you help us? Because you helped us with this. And, I'm a communication expert. My master's degree is in human communication theory. That's a pretty broad topic. That could apply to personal relationships. It could apply to workplace communication. And I have a lot of experience in the area of leadership. So all of those things, come into play. And I have basically spoken and talked about all kinds of things in that bigger wheelhouse. But when I am trying to put myself out there, trying to achieve a particular goal, I try to make it as narrow as possible. Now, if I could certainly drill down, and I do in a lot of instances. Like right now, I'm very focused on the pet industry. So I focus myself as a, leadership and team building expert for pet businesses if I'm promoting things. So that, that's at least going in the right direction of making that world a little bit smaller to focus on. So
That makes
any
a lot of sense because I see a
yeah,
lot of people say things like leadership or creativity, or it's like, well, that could be 500 things depending on who you're talking to or what people need. And
yeah,
for me, also with degrees in psychology and organizational psychology, that can be applied in so many different types of companies, organizations, groups that I love the idea of niching, but then you're still targeting what someone is looking for within your niche. So,
exactly.
yeah, it's a balance for sure.
Yeah. So any questions so far? All right, so let's go ahead and get into what the three elements of the niche triad are. The first thing would be your topic. Your that's it kind of gets into your area of expertise. And passion for a topic like happiness is nice, but it's not going to usually be enough. Now, could a person do a podcast on the subject of happiness? Great, but if I had a choice to choose between somebody that does a podcast on happiness and I'm trying to become a more happy person, am I going to go to the generalist who just believes in happiness, or am I going to go to the psychologist who spent 30 years studying what makes people happy and how they get there? I'm probably going to lean towards that expert. And when it comes to getting paid to speak and things like that, or getting paid sponsors, it's more likely that, if you are more than just passionate about a topic, you're more likely to get that interest. So people have a tendency to pay for and to stick with a person who helps them solve a problem that they're trying to solve. Now, when it comes to podcasting and certain speeches, could it be purely for entertainment value? Absolutely. But if that's not the where you are in your world, you probably do need to start thinking about some of these other elements along the way. So one of the things that I always ask people is, that person that wanted to speak on happiness, that's great, but what are you an actual subject matter expert in? Like, and where I like to dig with that is, if I come from just an example, if I have an education in human psychology and I took 6 courses in human happiness. I don't even know if there is such a thing, but that's something that you're going to build into your bio, that's part of why you should listen to Amy Castro on this subject. It might be research that you've done. It might be experience, like you worked at the Happiness Project, which was a nonprofit for blah, 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 blah. Great. Those are all things that feed into your credibility, and that what makes you the SME, the SME, as we called it in the Air Force, the subject matter expert. Or it could be a certain skill or ability. I mean, Connie, you obviously have skills in yoga and, all of I forget what you said, acupuncture, acupressure. But yeah, I mean, that's a skill, and you might have certificates and degrees in those things. And all of those things feed into what gives you the right, so to speak. And people fight me on this sometimes, or gives you the credibility to speak on that subject, that people would want to pay attention to you on that. Here's another thing where it kind of feeds into podcasts. So I did a search, just a quick Google search on best podcasts for moms. And I know there are more than 40 mom related podcasts, but of the original search that came up, um, this particular podcast called Working Moms was the 36th on the list as I went down out of 40 that it showed me, right? But when I did a search for best podcast for working moms, guess where this podcast ended up? Boom. And we know that's related to keywords and things like that. But that's the point, right? It's like you put your keywords because that's what you want people to find you for. And so not only having a title that says working moms, it's very clear what this is going to be about. Could they talk about dads? Maybe they do dad's week, or maybe they bring dad in on the thing, or whatever it might be, or grandparents. But the focus and the audience that's going to be drawn to that, it's going to catch the eye of a working mom before um, another one, let's say. So it feeds into many aspects of speaking and training, and it's going to be the same keyword um, power that you're going to have when it comes to creating your speaker website and putting your information out on the internet related to what you do if you're going to try to get out there and get speaking gigs for a particular subject. So any questions about this idea of, trying to just be very forward pushing in your expertise and making sure that you're kind of tuned in on that and that people are aware of that. Yes, Valeska.
So when you were talking about happiness, it makes me think of the podcast 10% Happier, right? Like that's a
Yes.
very popular podcast. And as a host, how far reaching can he be? Like how much can he whittle out his subject matter experts? Because I mean it could really be on any topic all about like the spokes of a wheel, right? It's kind of how I picture it. So like how far reaching do I want to be? I know there needs to be a variety, but how far out do I want to go from the main topic point?
I mean, some of that is gonna be, I think, situational. I think I struggle with this when I have people reach out to me for being on the pet podcast. Today alone, I had a dog attorney come on or reach out to me.
A
I
dog
had a holistic veterinarian. I had, what was the third one? Oh, that was an outreach that I was looking for people to come on the show and talk about why veterinary care is so expensive. So there was a couple people in that realm, and it's like I think once you decide what that lane is it's gonna help you determine whether you're gonna cover that topic or not. Like going back and looking at my first year, I would not do the dog dancing episode again this year. I would not do um, some of the adoption ones that we did. I might not, although it's been very popular download wise, I probably wouldn't do the episode on why the no kill movement is the worst thing that ever happened to animals. But that has to do with where I want the show to go, and I think it can change over time. Like this year,
Right.
we're focusing on finance. That's the big thing for me. It's like, what can I do to help people save money? Because people are calling me. I run a rescue to surrender their pets because they can't afford them. They can't afford the apartment extra rent or the deposit. They can't afford the vet bills. They can't afford whatever it might be. The food, my God, I bought a bag of dog food. It wasn't even great dog food the other day, and it was $78 for a bag of dog food. It's like, my gosh, how do I not know these
Yeah.
things? It was terrible. I mean, it's like now I'm looking for cheaper dog food, and and I can afford it. I just like it just seems nuts. So
Right.
so we're real
I was
focused on money saving at this point.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, Valeska, one of the things, and I think with the pet podcast, we see it more because it's such a huge topic. I mean, you some of the things people pitch me are just like insane. But like recently I was reached out to by the PR person for a professional hockey team because their mascot is wolves, and so the team does a lot around dog adoption and rescue and doing events, and so I'm like, that is something I would have never ever thought would have been reached out to me for my pet podcast, and maybe I would have not even thought that's a good fit, but I'm like, it's a professional hockey team, like, they're gonna promote this episode to their people, which are people I probably don't have any connection with,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes it's about the opportunity more than the topic. But
Mhm.
also, like Amy said, I think when we're new in podcasting, we kind of take everybody, and I have, and I also had the dog dancing person on my pet podcast.
And she's lovely. I mean, I
She
still keep in touch
is.
with her. And
But it's
it was a
not like
great
something I'm
story.
like, "Oh, yeah, let's talk about that again." Like, I'm looking for the stories that are more connecting to that connection between people and animals and getting people to rescue and adopt and all of that. But that's also
Yeah.
something I've learned as I've gone through the process.
Yeah.
And The other thing I wanna say is with my other podcast, which is about podcasting, I've struggled with that because it's kind of broad, but it isn't. And so, it's one of those things you kinda do it, and then great thing about podcasting is tomorrow I can change the name or the tagline or do a special series on a topic that is what people are talking about, even if that's not what I plan to talk about. So,
Mm.
I do think it's kind of picking your lane in terms of what your goal is and how you wanna help people that listen, and then see where it goes in terms of need and potential collaborations. At least that's kinda how
Yeah.
I see it in my head.
I mean, even something as simple as looking at what your download numbers are for one topic versus another. Like I discovered, I mean, and I've rebranded. I started off as Starlight Pet Talk, and there's a long story that I won't tell you now behind that. And then I switched to Muddy Paws and Hairballs in February, and I just rebranded to the Pet Parent Hotline. So 3 times since 2023, I've had 3 different names. But with each of those, the middle one was a bit of a mistake where I was kind of shooting in the dark on my own. The first one was very intentional, and the move to this one was very intentional. And the process of redeveloping the focus of the show has really helped me identify who is listening to my show and what do they need? What problems are they trying to solve? They're not trying to solve dog dancing. They're not trying to find a dog dancing class for their dog or the benefit of dog dancing or whatever, rescuing greyhounds. Like that's not where they're at. And so, but if I wanted that, like Julie's podcast, even though it's a pet podcast, it's very different than mine, even though there's been overlaps in guests. And like I wouldn't do the hockey one, and I wouldn't even do it if, because like the promotion piece, that's also a bit of a shot in the dark too, because they may or may not promote it as well as you need them to or at all. But you hope they do, and that can be something you can work into your agreement with them. And that's a whole nother conversation. But something to think about. So, but that wouldn't be what I know my audience is looking for right now. But, again, we have very different pet podcasts. All right, so moving along, because I know we have a limited window of time here. So the second piece of the niche triad is if you can focus in on a particular an industry. I use that in kind of the broadest sense. Like if you were doing something, um, either the divorce prep or Stacy, your topic on the, that future planning, it could be that it might be for boomers, who are at retirement age. I mean, that sort of ties into audience, but there might not be a targeted industry per se. But you also could do a presentation that was geared specifically for financial planners. And maybe you have a whole thing like how you can help your clients with this piece of it, like that you're helping them with their money, but what about the rest of the mess of the lives of the parent that's left behind, that kind of thing. So it's looking for opportunities based on your topic and your expertise. So again, industry in the broadest sense is just a group of organizations based on what is their kind of goal or focus. So for me, I'm very focused on the pet industry right now. So what I will always ask people is you can, start with the low hanging fruit of what you already know, what you already have experience in, where do you have credibility, where have you already worked? Like I know a guy that's a speaker and he comes from a huge chunk of his career was in human resources. And for whatever reason, he fought that and wanted to go in this other direction of motivational speaking. And he was not really super successful. And now he's back taking that motivational message, but targeting it to the industry and the people that he knows because it's the low hanging fruit. I can talk the language. I have contacts in the industry, 30 years worth of contacts in the industry. And I'm not saying you can't branch out and do something different. If you're like, I'm completely done with that, I don't want anything to do with HR, then more power to you. But then you've got to go back to that first piece of the triad and how am I going to build credibility in this other area that I don't have 30 years of experience in. So, if you think about trying to niche down either as let's focusing as a speaker, like I know for me, I could speak in education because I taught community college for 15 years. I can speak to government because I've got the local, Texas cities and counties. I've done dozens of those. I've also done aerospace because I've done NASA, which is also government, but at the federal level. So looking for places, healthcare. One of my clients was Texas Children's Hospital. So it's like, okay, now you've got that industry that you've gotten into. So the point of that is to that again, low hanging fruit. So that's where I'm going to target my initial efforts. But then also you can parlay those experiences into other related experiences. So for example, when I first started my speaking business, my daughter was a baby when I really first started. And so when I first started, I only did like lunch workshops. I'd go do an hour lunch workshop. I'd get a babysitter, go do an hour lunch workshop. And then when she went off to kindergarten, half day kindergarten, I did half day workshops. And then when she went off to school, I did full day workshops. And so one of the things that I tried to do is stay close to home. So at the time I was living in the city of League City. Now, did I get the gig at the city of League City while I lived in League City? No, I got it when I moved to the next town over. And then suddenly I go back and get this gig for the city of League City. But once I got my foot in the door with city of League City, I have basically spent the last 30 years speaking for cities and counties because I took that gig and I said to the city of Friendswood, Plano, Dallas, Houston, and all their related counties, I'm a training provider for the city of League City. I've presented these topics to them successfully and helped their help their employees do blah, 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 blah. And but boom, that's how you kind of dig further into that industry. Because one of the things about certain industries, like if there's a one in particular that you wanted as a speaker to speak to, um, the hardest gig is that first one, breaking into that industry, especially if it's not one that you have been in before, like healthcare. Once I got Texas Children's, then I parlayed that into St. Luke's and other places. Once I got my first veterinarian, then it's like, well, I've spoken to these veterinarians and, this veterinarian, and we've done this program. Each one of them is tricky, but once you get in, you might as well stay in, right? Especially if you like the people. Like I enjoyed the people in those groups. And then other ones like I did automotive. I got a speaking gig at a car dealership, wasn't really thrilled with it. So I've not taken that and tried to parlay that into reaching out to other automotive dealerships. So, but again, the easy way is to start with the industries that you've already been into. And I think you can do this also in podcasting. Now, why I thought of this person, I don't know, but one of the people that I worked with when I worked out at Johnson Space Center was she wasn't the CFO when I was working for her, but eventually, got promoted up into that position. So I was just thinking about her the other day and I thought, well, if she wanted to start a podcast, so she's the chief financial officer for Johnson Space Center. Obviously she's worked in government, she's worked in aerospace, she's got tons of contact in those areas. She's got credibility in those areas. But, the other thing, and thinking kind of broad and more spokes, she was at the C-suite level of leadership. So she could start a podcast on C-suite leadership, or if she wanted to niche it down a little bit more, she could do C-suite leadership skills for government leaders. And there's lots of them, there's plenty of them. There's also an organization called the Government Finance Officers Association, which I spoke to. That was one of my fringe government organizations. They have 26,000 members. So maybe she wants to do a podcast for leadership skills for government finance officers. She'd be the only one doing that show. And I guarantee you, of those 26,000 people, if they were looking to expand their careers and grow their skills, guess what podcast they're going to listen to? They're going to listen to hers. They might listen to 100 other leadership ones, but that would definitely be one that they would stumble upon and want to listen to. So any questions about that as far as like industry or finding that piece of the niche or niche, if you like to say niche?
I have a question about this, but first I want to say I love how you presented that because for me, I was in higher ed for almost 20 years
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't really tapped into that in any way for my podcasting or my speaking, or almost like it's kind of like I shut the door, but it's like I can say I worked in this area. I'd love to come talk about XYZ. And there's so many levels within, education, and that could be other areas of education besides university level. So I think that is important sometimes, especially if we've shifted or we're focused on a different path in our business. We feel like we
Mm-hmm.
can't go there, And I have a friend who always says, Julie, why don't you say you're Dr. Julie? And I'm like, well, I'm not a doctor of podcasting. And she's like, it doesn't matter. You still use skills from that career and education in this area. So I think sometimes we
Mhm.
just need a reminder that we sell ourselves short.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the other side of that is it can be overwhelming in terms of industries when you're trying to figure out where do I even start looking? There's so many associations and groups and things. I think that part can be overwhelming within this area of the industry piece.
Yeah. Well, and in speaking, right? I mean, a lot of the associations that hire speakers now, in this, we won't go too far down this path, but, there are going to be, nationally or internationally known keynoters. And those are the people that are getting the 20, 30, 40, 50, $60,000 for the organizations that can afford that. And basically, they're getting all the money. So all of the other programs that you see presented throughout that conference are either getting they're either getting nothing, they're getting their conference fees paid, like somebody offered to pay my conference fees to go speak at a grooming. Now, as much as I would really love to go to this grooming conference, because I just think it's fascinating, the things that they do when they're grooming dogs and making them look like zebras and whatever else. Although I have a little bit of an issue with how long that poor dog has to stand there to get that hairdo. But um, I'm not going to that Groom Expo. I'm not gonna fly to Pennsylvania to go to Hershey to go to that Groom Expo thing unless you're gonna pay me to go there. I wasn't going anyway. So because most people, it's like, oh, I'm in the grooming industry, I'm a groomer, I'm gonna teach this class on how to give a puppy cut. And so therefore it'd be awesome. I'll do a little session and then I'll let them pay for my airfare and my hotel room. Cool. Now I get to go to the conference for free. But for Amy Castro, a professional paid speaker, no, that's not going to work for me. And then there's some conferences that do have some budget for those what are called breakout sessions. So it's the more you can, number one, you want to know that going into it if you're trying to make money speaking. Now, if I was just trying to get my name out there, like when I first started speaking at Global Pet Expo, I did get paid nicely, but that wasn't the objective. The objective was to get in front of those pet audiences and to get access to the trade show floor so I could meet pet industry people and, maybe find sponsors for my animal rescue or for my podcast. Or I had all these different objectives over the years and it's changed. So it really depends on what your goals are going into that. But if you already have some foot in the door in that industry, it's easier to break in to those conferences for sure. Because the credibility factor is there.
Did you have a question, Stacy?
Oh, sorry.
Nope, just nodding in appreciation.
All right, and last but not least, the third piece of the triad is your target audience. And I mentioned boomers as being a possible overlap, but and sometimes it is industry and target audience are kind of the same thing. But when I think about this, like I know what my sweet spot is for regardless of the industry. I like to work with frontline employees and frontline leaders. I don't like to do training with C-suite executives or coach them because they're all a bunch of know-it-alls and they're just a pain in the butt, And so I would rather teach my frontline customer service survival skills class to that poor woman or guy that's working the front desk at the City of Friendswood utility billing that gets beaten up and lied to all day by the citizens of Friendswood or something like that. So I know what my sweet spot is, and so I will market to that because I know that the my overall industry being, if I use just the one of the Texas cities, counties, those are the people that they spend a lot of time giving training to because they're not coming from a master's degree program in finance and et cetera, et cetera. Although those people up here need it probably more sometimes than the frontline people. But so think about whether it's the podcast or a presentation is that who is it targeted for, like, and even just the customer service skills. Like I have done customer communication skills for veterinarians, and then I've done customer communication skills for front desk employees in a veterinary practice. And so there's going to be overlap in content, but but there are going to be differences as well. And so the more that you can spell out who it is that your target audience is, again, the more likely it is that you're going to find them. And I think especially in the podcast area, like I know for a fact my target audience, and if I had the guts, which I'm kind of breaking my own niche rules a little bit when I was renaming, or it's not even the name of pet parent hotline is fine. But what I really would like to be saying in all my dialogue is pet moms, because 85% of the people that listen to my show, and 85 or maybe higher percent of the people in the world that provide the primary care for pets are women, but I just, it's like making that, I don't want to, because I know there's that 15 or 20%. I don't want to suddenly start saying pet moms and they're like, oh, I guess I'm eliminated. And I work it in, but I don't make it as obvious. But it certainly is narrowed to pet parents. I mean, I don't need veterinarians listening to my podcast. I don't need a person that has a grooming shop to listen to my podcast. I'd love it if they refer their clients to it, but it's pretty targeted. And so you can do that with speaking or podcasting, and that way people know exactly who needs to be listening, and it's for me, just like the working moms example that we saw before. So, think about it from that perspective, is to, you probably could speak on your topic in a certain industry to anybody within that industry, but who do you really want to speak to? Because I will say, having done this for 30 years, for probably 20 of the 30 years, I spoke to whoever about anything in my area of expertise. And it got to the point where I've really soured on speaking in many ways. Like if you call me up and you say, hey, because I live in Houston, we've got a lot of chemical companies. Hey, I work for Exxon Mobil. And you'd think, ooh, Exxon Mobil as a client. I already don't want to go. It's like, because I don't want to speak to, well, first of all, I don't want to drive out to that chemical plant and smell the chemicals and be in this building on springs with no windows because it's designed for explosions, and speak to a bunch of people who are hot and sweaty and dirty and just came off a 12-hour shift in their jumpsuit, sitting back in their chair like this because now they have to go to leadership training. I can't do it anymore. I used to do it. I can't do it anymore. And I'm not saying that all of those audiences are not receptive, but there's another group, law enforcement. I have to, I had a lot of questions before I will do that, because they are not the most cooperative. If you're not a cop, I don't want to hear from you. That's what 80 to 90% of them are like when you try to go and give a presentation. And you don't want to be pulling teeth. I don't think so. I mean, it's stressful enough to stand in front of a group of people and talk. You don't want to be pulling teeth while you're doing it. So I have really, in 30 years, really narrowed down what I'll do for whom, what topics will I do for whom, and what industries, because that's what makes it worth getting out of bed in the morning. You don't want to be that person, and maybe it'll never happen to you, but it happened to me, where I'm dreading. I did one probably about 3 years ago. I kid you not, I was dreading it for 6 months, and it
Oh
was
my
highly
God.
paid. Okay. I mean, I got paid 10 grand to go run my mouth for 6 hours, but I dreaded it for 6 months. I dreaded it driving there. It was lovely. The people were fine. And when I left, I was like, thank God that's over. I mean, it was just like, it was not what I wanted to do. But you wanted me to go to speak to my vet for $1,500? Yeah, okay, I'm in. Can I bring my dog? It's just what jazzes you, because it's not an easy job. The podcasting is not easy either, but the speaking can be tough, and it's lonely, and you better like it, because otherwise it's just that much more unpleasant. So think about that. And you probably, have you all done that as far as podcasting, who it is that you want to get this message out to?
You mean as far as creating an avatar for
Yeah,
what your listening
basically.
audience would be? Yeah,
Yeah.
I've done a lot of work on that because I originally didn't start with a podcast. I was looking at doing a workshop and creating an online course. And so then I parlayed that into doing this podcast because I felt like there were a lot of components that were really useful and valuable to people that I couldn't cram into this thing, because the whole point of what I'm doing is to reduce overwhelm. And the last thing I want is for somebody to have a 50-page document in front of them, you know?
Yeah.
So it's definitely helped. And it also, I think a big part of it, going back to your example of this chemical factory or refinery, is like I put in the comments, I had somebody pitch to me and the pitch was great. Good information. They talked about what their perspective was. I thought this would be a good guest. He seems like he's got his stuff together. So then I went and I listened to a few recent episodes and I did my search with a time block. So it was less than 6 months. And that was the most chauvinistic man I'd heard in a long time. And I thought, you seriously want to talk to women? Get out of town.
Yeah,
No
I
way.
know.
And so I was so grateful that I did that research, even if it was just minimal, but then I had to write that uncomfortable email, like, because I'm not going to say thank you, but I don't think so. I had to say thank you. I heard you on this podcast. That is not congruent with my message. I
Mhm.
appreciate your outreach and I'm honored by your ask, but I don't think this is a fit for us, meaning you and me. So
Yeah,
I think it's really important to listen to your gut when you're talking to other people and giving a presentation, or if you're interviewing a guest and it kind of goes sideways, feel through that. It can be.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's really important. I always say, even though I don't always take my own advice, don't say yes to be on a podcast you haven't listened to. I've had a couple where I was like rubbed the wrong way. One, it was a guy who tried to coach me. And the other was the way he pronounced my name. He kept calling me, Miss Julie, like MISS. And I didn't, it was live.
was he
So
from
I didn't.
Texas? Because that's
Doctor,
what
it's
everybody says
Dr.
down here.
Julie.
Right, and it was live stream, and so I think if it had been recorded, I would have corrected him because he could have edited out, but I didn't feel comfortable, and now I beat myself up about that. And it wasn't even the doctor point; it was the way that he was MISS, and I'm like, I have two last names. I'm married. Why are you calling me Miss like I'm a little 22-year-old or something? There's those little things that I would have known if I'd listened. But the other side of it is which I think is important to think about with speaking is when I'm looking at which podcast to guest on or even to pitch myself is who are their listeners? And I've had
Mhm.
some good connections even on Podmatch, but then I look at it and it's a male host, mostly male guests, and it says, predominantly male listeners or something. And it's like, yes, I could go on that and I could share, but those aren't my people. Can I help men in podcasting or whatever it may be? Yes, but I know how my style and my purpose and my pitch is really more for women. And so that is something I've decided to make a priority. And I do think that's important. And so I could see how in speaking it could be similar, but I would say in sometimes you wouldn't know until you walk into the room and see who's there, right? So some of it is also just trial by error.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good question. Is there a way, I wasn't paying attention to the chat this whole time, sorry, but if I missed something, let me know. Is there a way to see the demographics on listeners and know that's accurate and not just their perception?
Mm.
I mean, I know I can see that on my on my
Right.
stats. I don't know that there's a place where you can, I wonder if Maupod, if you can see anything on there, I'd have to look.
Well, I
Yeah, I
mean,
don't know.
What
I'm
about
on
listen
Apple. I
notes?
don't know if I put in there that I'm a female, I'm in this age bracket or any of that. I mean, does it pull those data for me? Or is
Um,
it just I live here, my IP address is this state,
right.
city, and country?
So
Yeah.
the one thing in terms of listener demographics, obviously as a host, you're going to see it in your host. They're going to show you where they're listening location wise, device wise, and maybe some
Age
other things.
brackets.
Yeah. But that's why I like Podmatch because it's actually a part of the profile when a podcast host
Yeah,
creates
listen
their
notes.
profile, it asks them very specifically who are your listeners. And so a lot of the Podmatch profiles will say men and women or women or, ages or generations. Some are general, so you don't really know. Listen notes is what I always tell people to look at. I don't think it says anything about gender specifically, but it will show if they rank in different countries and topics. And it also shows you categorically other podcasts like them, which is going to tend to let you know. Like if I'm looking at one and then there's a bunch of other female hosted podcasts, more likely than not, those are going to be female listeners. I mean, it depends on the topic. So, it's kind of a give and take and figure out what to go with. But it is still a shot in the dark because none of us are collecting all of that data. We have no idea, gender wise or age wise for sure who's listening, because it's really about what the podcast apps are collecting, and each one
Yeah.
is different. Like, you get different data from Apple than you do from Spotify than you do from, like your RSS feed.
Yeah. That said, though, I would say, like, if I look at, I can, for my own show, I can see I mean, there's definitely a continuity to the age ranges and the gender and that kind of thing. So I think my guess would be too, and I have not dug around specifically looking for this, but if you went to look at a podcast and looked at their website or looked at their show notes and see, like, what pronouns are they using, are they using dog moms or, pet parents, or they, whatever it is, see if there's maybe a clue in that language. But yeah,
Yeah.
that can be a little bit dicey figuring that out, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would think it'd be a lot harder even with speaking, unless a group says, "Come speak to our women business owners or our women leaders," or something. Otherwise, kind
Yeah.
of the assumption is it's going to be mixed, unless it's an industry that leans far one way or the other, gender wise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and when I am going to well, there are going to be stats for conferences and such. Usually there's a lot of attendee information that you can get access to. And as far as like going out to a client, um, any client that I've ever had has been able to tell me, this is the percentage. It's probably 80-20 men to women or whatever it might be. And, because I always want to know the gender makeup, the age, God forbid, like when I used to, and I won't dabble in this anymore because now I don't even know that I necessarily believe in a lot of it, but the whole generations. I mean, I believe that there are generations and we do have characteristics of our generation. It's how it's being applied in the workplace that I struggle
Right.
with. But there's a big difference between doing a generations in the workplace for, only boomers and doing it for a mixed group.
Right.
Or I know there's only two, like one time there was like two millennials when millennials were babies, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be defending these people the whole time, trying to protect them from the boomers who are telling them how
Right.
lazy and whatever they are, and so it's good to know as much of that information going into it so you can tailor your content.
Yeah, and I think in today's world, most industries are so varied because boomers are still working, and you got the Gen X's and the millennials, and now, Gen Z is a part of the mix. And
Yep.
they are all different in some ways, but also not, because we all have to be at the same level tech-wise now. So, generationally, we all have to kind of pull up to that level. And so, yeah, it's a hard
Yeah.
thing to know, but I think it's better to be prepared for a variety of people and then niche down once you're in the room and realize you can really get more specific based on who you're in front of.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I've tried to do too with the podcast specifically is because I'm noticing a trend up in the 18 to 24 bracket that was not there before, and a trend down in the people. I'm 59, so my age or older has been trending down, and this other group is, I guess, discovering the show. And so that changes a little bit about how, because obviously I'm 59 years old, so I'll ask my millennial daughter, like, how would you bring this up, or what example would you give in this to try to, create relatable content. I also dig around a lot on Reddit. Reddit's a great source of research for me.
I haven't done much with that. I'm gonna have to try some.
It is a surprising gold mine, I have to say. I only discovered it
Yeah.
about a year ago, and it is one of my top places to go for info now.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's interesting from the standpoint. I mean, like Julie, for yours, you'll be able to kind of see. I mean, there's a subgroup for everything. So if you were like, hey, I've got some upcoming episodes, I want to focus on rescue. So you go to the rescue subreddit and see what are the issues, the dilemmas out there. But it's yeah, it's been a good source of info.
Mm.
So
Okay. Well, let's open it up to other questions, comments. I'll go ahead
yeah, feel free to
and
ask anything if you want. I mean, it doesn't have to be about the triad.
I was curious about Amy, how you know that what age group people are listening. you said that there's more younger ones listening to your podcast, less older people.
Yeah,
How do you-
because in my Buzzsprout platform where my podcast lives, when I go into statistics, it tells me what, like down to there were 2 people in Sri Lanka that listened to this episode, like that kind of thing. And so it does have a gender and an age bracket with a little bar chart and shows me that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can show mine really quick.
Yeah, I was going to
I'll
say, it'd take me a minute to
identify,
pull it
or
up
is
if
it
you got it
like-
handy.